So about 3 years ago, we did the first ever paint guide on the channel, and it turned out to be Synthwave Dante. Here he is. At the time, I was pretty happy with it because, well, that was kind of the top of my skill level. And then over the next year, I ended up taking painting just a little bit more seriously. And so we came back and we did Synthwave Dante V2, which was this guy. And I was super happy with him because I got to do like a non-metallic metal color shift kind of thing. And now that we're nearly 1,000 videos into the channel and we've painted, I don't know, probably 1,000 models, it's time to see what we've actually learned. Measuring your growth is and isn't important. It all just depends on if it's something that you care about. If you're actively trying to improve your skills, then this is a pretty decent way to go about it. And it is kind of nice to step back and see that all your hard work is actually paying off. Okay, so we have our baseline from our last 2 models. And if we actually want to get better, we're going to have to be pretty honest with our self-criticism. OG Dante is pretty dope, but the airbrush did all the heavy lifting, so this one's not going to help us much. But Dante V2 was all brush work. There's a good basic understanding of light here, but I was shooting for a non-metallic metal color shift, so the highlights are pretty wild and everywhere. Blending between some of the layers is also pretty rough, and a lot of the details are just really dark. But at least that gives us somewhere to start from. Let's be honest, we all know the colors that we're going to use for this, the same as every other video that we've ever done. And no, it doesn't get boring. I work from the Synthwave palette, and we're going to start with Terrestial Titan. This is going to be our deepest, darkest color, so we're going to base coat this everywhere. Because if there's a recess on this model, we want it Terrestial Titan. The idea for Dante, third of his name, is a synthwave take on non-metallic metal gold. Think somewhere along the lines of thermal vision, except it's non-metallic metal. So we're going to use a lot of purples, pinks, and oranges. Otherwise, this entire video is just painting brown. To start setting up our layers, we're going to mix Terrestial Titan with Diabolic Plum. Every time we introduce a new color to this model, we're going to be mixing it with the previous color. And this is to help with our transitions and blending. But there is also another very specific reason that we're doing it this way. You'll see a lot of people paint very hard to find layers when painting non-metallic metal, and then they'll go back and glaze the transitions in. And that's a great way to do it if you're using very similar tones. But because the Synthwave palette is a little bit wilder, some of these glaze transitions don't work too well. They can either be incredibly overpowering or just end up muddy and desaturated. And we don't want that. We don't want that at all. These half steps are going to help us keep the saturation and vibrancy of every single color that we lay down. Blending and transitions were some of the trouble spots that we noticed with Dante V2, which is why we're paying a little bit more attention to the process of application. Not only with colors and smoothness, but also trying to zero out our brush strokes. And what I mean by zeroing out our brush strokes is trying to make it look like it's not actually painted. I mean, obviously it's going to look like it's painted because I'm not Andy Wardle. There are some physical variables that we can alter for a smoother application of paint. Firstly, something that we hear about all the time is paint consistency, or more colloquially known as thinning your paints. I do this in 2 different ways. Firstly, I always work with a slightly damp brush, and you can use either water or a medium like the War Paint Stabilizer. And secondly is actually thinning the paints on your palette. Again, you can use water or War Paint Stabilizer for this. And I know that people are going to ask what is the exact ratio of medium to paint for this. And the answer is, there isn't one. Every single paint, even if it's from the exact same range, is going to behave slightly differently. Some paints are thicker, some paints have better coverage. And on the flip side, the exact opposite is true. Some paints are thinner and some paints don't have as great a coverage. But there's also another aspect to this, and that's personal preference. And with all these powers combined like a really frustrating Captain Planet, it means there's no one answer. The best way to figure out how to get paints to behave the way that you want them to is just by experimenting. We can watch all the videos in the world to get inspiration and pick up tips on how to paint something, but nothing actually beats the experience of picking up a brush and doing it yourself to see how that works for you. If solely watching videos increase your skill level for anything, I would be a better painter, guitarist, and lovemaker. So myth busted. Now that we've started to introduce orange into the mix, here's where we enter our poo phase. And as a warning, it is legitimately going to look this bad all the way up until we add our final highlights. But on the plus side, we can now actually start to see where we're sketching our light into. The best way for me personally to visualize building shapes and highlighting is to think of a topographical map. The recesses are our valleys, so they are going to be our deepest, darkest colors. The midtones are then going to become our flat and sea level areas. And you can think about our midtones as ground level because that's the color that we want the model to be represented as. And then as we get higher up onto our map into our peaks, that's where the highlights come in. The cool thing about this specific scheme is you get to see all of this in action using different colors. If this were a more traditional non-metallic metal gold, we would have started from a dark brown, going into a medium brown, to then work up into a very yellowish light brown. But with something like this, we can go back to our topographical map reference. Our recesses and valleys are all purple. As we continue to build up that shape, we then head into the pink, which brings us into the orange mix. And that last step of orange is where we start to level out into our flats to become our midtone. Because the orange is serving as a transition into our yellow. And because we're still painting with gold in mind, it means yellow is going to be our midtone. And remember, our midtone is what we want the model to read as. So while it is a lot of work and it's been a lot of layers, we've only just moved out of the shadows. But now that we have gotten to introduce our midtone, we can start working on those peaks. For all of these highlights, I'm just going to be mixing ice yellow into the moonbeam yellow, and picking out the absolute highest spots of where we want our light to be reflecting from. Before then moving into a single dot of pure ice yellow, which is basically just going to be the flag on top of the mountain.
Now, one of the coolest things that's happened in the past 3 years is building a relationship with the army painter, and that kind of evolved into them approaching me and asking if I'd like to join the army painter factory team, which I played hard to get for about 23 seconds. And not only is this awesome for me, but it actually works out for you guys as well. Because when you jump on the Army Painter website, you can go through the checkout and enter code Heresy5 for a sweet discount. And if you're in Australia, that same Heresy5 code will work at in-games on any of the Army Painters range that they keep in stock. But if you also wanted to take a little step further in supporting the channel, we also have a Patreon full of the most amazing people that you'll ever come across in the hobby. And I legitimately mean that. There is a members only Discord that nobody has ever been banned or muted from. Well, we did mute one guy for like 15 minutes, but that's just because it was funny. Links to the Army Painter, in-games, and the Patreon are all in the description.
Now that you've seen the how, let's talk a little bit about the why. Why is it important to keep advancing our skills? And honestly, it's not, unless you want it to be. I've spoken about this a few times on the channel. I've now been in the hobby for 23 years. And legitimately, for 20 of those years, I didn't give 3 shits about painting at a high level. All I wanted to do was kit bash some models, get some paint on them, and then go and throw some dice with friends. Don't get me wrong, I really liked painting, and I really enjoyed when something came out really cool. And just like everybody else, when a model came out pretty well, I was happy with it. And if something looked like hot garbage, then it was just the first one removed off the table. But then I had a workplace accident. We're just gonna say it was a significant hip injury. And that then introduced some physical limitations. I had a hard enough time trying to walk, let alone trying to stand up and play a game for 3 or 4 hours. Truth be told, I would have had a hard time even getting out the door with my army. And with all of this, it meant that my idea of hobbying had to change. And that's where my attention started to shift from just painting to play the game to just painting. Now, I've also mentioned this before on the channel, but I am an incredibly competitive person. So when my focus shifted towards painting, I had to be good at it. And that meant improving my skill level was important to me. But that doesn't mean that it has to be important to you. One of the best things about Warhammer in general is that it's a very personal hobby. We all enjoy the same thing, but we enjoy it in different ways. Which is why I think gatekeepers are the scum of the universe, and you will never change my mind. But back to the idea of tracking your progress. Because Warhammer is such a giant machine where we usually just pick up models because we need to get them painted so I can play with it, or they want to finish a project so we can move on to the next thing. It means that we don't usually take a lot of time to kind of stop, reflect, and kind of appreciate what we've done, all the skills that we're learning. Even if you don't have a goal in mind, even if there's an aspiration that you're not trying to reach, you can still keep track of your progress just to see how far you've come. Which brings up the question of, is it all worth it? This was about 26 hours worth of work, and if I'm being completely honest, there's probably another 10 to 15 hours that I could spend refining blends and cleaning up lines. And I can still say without a shadow of a doubt, this will not win a Golden Demon. And there's also no way that something like this is realistically repeatable for an entire army.
So if we're not getting awards and we can't do it with an army, why do it? And honestly, it's just because I love it. You don't need a goal or a promise of an outcome to do something that you enjoy. So every year in May, I am going to pick up a brand new Commander Dante model and paint it to the absolute tippy top of my abilities. And not only does it show the improvement of the last 12 months, but it's a great way to measure of where I'm up to now and what I need to work on in the next 12 months. And it's going to hold me accountable. There's no way to cheat that. I either did put in the work or I didn't. And don't worry, before we wrap this all up in a nice little bow, we are going to do something more than just painting purple to yellow. Because don't worry, I'm sick of looking at it too. So let's jump ahead and have a quick look at the turquoise non-metallic metals. We only need 3 paints for this one. It's Deep Azure, Turquoise Siren, and Marine Mist. For this one, I'm going to try and leave some of the black in the recess and paint just the details in between. The harder part with doing non-metallic metals on something like this is we can't look at it like a topographical map. Because these are all flat surfaces that are slightly curved, we can really only infer that there's reflections of light. So the easiest way I find to do this is somewhere around the crook of the top of the wing and then each individual feather as it comes out from the wing itself. And now let's have a look at 3 years of Dante. The OG will always be something special for this channel, and I should have drilled that barrel. Dante V2 is where we really got to stretch things out with doing some non-metallic metal color shift. And now, I can't say I love it because that means I'd have to congratulate myself on something and that feels weird. Drop a comment below and let me know what do you think about tracking your progress. As always, a massive thank you to InGames, the Army Painter, and the best Patreon members in the world. Big love, you filthy heretics.